Okay, this is lab number 8, parallel versus series flow. And in this lab we're going to adjust a valve that will change the flow rate split between a main pipe and a bypass pipe. And we're going to look at pressure drops, flow rates when we change the position of a valve. So you've all been provided with this lab report. I'd like you to go through individually and read through all of the lab and then discuss it with your group. So go ahead and pause the video now to do that. Okay, let's go through and review briefly the lab report. We have a safety section which you should have carefully read, and then there's some background giving motivation for the lab. There are a couple of questions of a pre-lab, and then the lab itself is section questions 1 through 6. Questions 2 through 5 ask you to predict various behavior, pressure drop, flow rate, valve position, and how that affects the overall system. In question 6, we're going to run the pump cart to see if experimentally we get the same behavior that we predicted in questions 2 through 5. So let's discuss the pump cart now. The pump cart is shown here, and you can see the large tank that holds the fluid, water in this case, and then we have this black pump here, and it draws fluid through this lower pipe, up through this upper pipe, which runs through a flow meter, and then into a pneumatic control valve that runs through a globe valve, through a ball valve, and around to the back. This globe valve adjusts the split between this bent bypass valve and the main line going horizontally there. So if we come back over to this side, we can see the globe valve, and it can be adjusted here. And what I'd like you to do for a few minutes is, with your group, discuss the pump cart and the various valves and think about what positions they need to be set in and what you need to do to set up and run this unit before we get started. So go ahead and pause the video here. Okay, so if we go back over to the valve, this is what we're going to be adjusting to change the split of the flow between the bypass line and the main line. It's currently totally off, and we can just manually see how many turns it takes to open the valve. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turns to open the valve, and we can use that to adjust the valve position as we go through the experiment. So let's transition over to the flow controller. Flow controller is shown here, and I want you to examine the flow controller and consider the different measurements being made, the different controls that you can change, and think about what you want to do to run the experiment, what you're going to change, and discuss that with your group. Try to map that out in as much detail as you can, exactly what you're going to do and what you're going to set in order to set up and do this lab. So go ahead and pause the video here and discuss with your group. Okay, so we have a main power switch. If we turn that on, you can hear air being fed to the control valve. And then we're measuring delta P across various pressure taps in the piping system. We have a pump speed set point. I'm going to leave that at 100% so we get the maximum flow. And then there's a flow controller that can be set to manual or to automatic. If it's on auto control, then the flow set point the control valve will adjust in order to achieve this flow set point. I'm going to set it to manual control so that we can directly set the position of the main valve, and as we change that, you'll hear air go into that valve when its position changes. And I'm going to leave that 100% open so that we get the maximum flow through the unit. Now at the bottom here we have a time between data points. I'm going to set that to be 1 second between data points collected, and then I'll specify 30 points to be collected, and we can use that to get average properties for the pressure drops and flow rates that will be recorded. When we hit the push to record button, the data will count up from 1 up to 30. Once it hits 30, we'll be finished, and then we can come down and click on this button to get the data file, which will store the data to Excel. Before we get started, let's have one more look at the pump system. I just want to emphasize that this blue box here is a flow meter for the bypass. So we have the main flow rate in the whole unit, this unit over this flow meter here, and then we have the flow rate through the bypass, and with that you can infer the flow rate through the main section. So let's go over to the controller, and we'll just re-verify what our valve is set at. It's currently closed. So we can turn our pump on, and then once the pump comes up to full speed, we'll push to record our data. .5 gallons per minute, push to record the data. And as that counts up, now it's 2, 3, 4, etc. I will stop the recording while that increments up to 30. Okay, 28, 29, and 30. Okay, and now it's done. We can go ahead and turn the pump off. We can scroll down to the bottom, get data file, save the file, and I'm going to put this on my J drive on my 285 folder and call it Lab 8. And we'll go 0 of 5 turns open. That means that it's closed. Give it a nice, obvious file name. Click Save. And then we can go and look at what that, what's in that data file. I didn't show that naming of the file on the screen, but here I'll come back, and if we go Get Data File again, save the file. Here you go. Just name it. Here's my J drive, and here's the name that I gave it. And then if we go and open a file, this isn't the exact same file, but this gives you an idea of what we're looking at. You can see it measures the time. When you first get the data file, it'll look like this. If you highlight the columns and then double click the header, you can spread them out, and you can see it measures the time, the water temperature, pump speed, bypass flow rate, main flow rate, and then we have pressure drops across the various sections. So you'll use this data to answer the questions in the lab. So let's go and go back to the flow controller. And for this, we will go and set the valve to a new position. So let's see, let's go back to our camera and set the valve. We're currently closed. Let's go ahead and open it 3 turns. 1, 2, 3 turns. And we can go to our controller and turn our pump back on, and then we'll record 30 more data points. And it looks like the flow is evened out, so push to record, and the data points are counting up. So go ahead and pause the video while that evaluates. Okay, 27, 28, 29, and 30. There we go. Okay, and it's finished, and then we can turn our pump back off. And we can go down and get our, let's go down and get our data file, save the file, and this one was 3 of 5 turns open, save that. And then essentially we just go and repeat this process for various valve positions, and then we can go and process the data, take averages of the data to get the mean flow rates and the mean pressure drops, and complete the lab report. Once we're finished with the pump controller, we can turn off the main power, and then we right-click to release control of the virtual interface, and that completes the lab.